Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad to be here with all of you tonight. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We are going to have a great conversation here tonight. It is going to be yet another awesome one of our conversations. Let's go. Let's do it. Let's get the show going. Let's get the show on the road. Let's do it.
The American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, 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 everybody. It is a great night here. It is the 29th of June, the second to last day of June, and I am in my lovely Brooklyn apartment, and we have a lot to talk about here tonight, a lot of exciting things to talk about. I said on the demon app known as Twitter that I have a special announcement to make tonight, and I do have a special announcement to make tonight. But I'm not going to make it just yet. I'll be making it towards the end of my opening remarks for tonight. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and we are going to have a great conversation here tonight. I've got so much to talk to you about. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with the way we do things on this show, first, I give my opening remarks. Second, after I give my opening remarks, we do the roll call. We find out who it is who's on the other side of the camera. Third, the third thing that we do is we then answer super chat questions for the rest of the night. And the first super chat is already rolled in. So someone's asking me what my thoughts on the affirmative action decision are, and I am writing that down. Thoughts on affirmative action decision. So there you go. Keep the super chats rolling in. I will answer super chat questions in the second half of the program. That's what I plan to do. I generally will answer all super chat questions about whatever topic. I may not give you the answer that you want, but I will give you an answer if you send me a super chat. So I'll be writing them down throughout the first half of our show. I'll be answering them and continuing to write them down as they roll in throughout the second half of our show. That's the way we're going to do it. And it's going to be awesome. It's going to be tremendous. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be great. It's going to be just downright awesome. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. I will start my opening remarks here in just one quick second. I just want to check, I just want to check one quick thing. And now I'm going to start my opening remarks. So like I said, if super chat questions come, I'll be writing them down, and I'm just going to talk about a few things here in my opening remarks. Folks, sometimes history can be ironic. Let me repeat that. Sometimes history can be ironic. There can be things that happen on the exact same date that are both very important in the history of the world, that are pretty unrelated. There doesn't seem to be any direct connection between them at all. But yet they still happen on the same date. There are different examples of this one can point to throughout history. But the most blatant example of historical irony that I've ever been aware of is two events that happened on April 15th, 1912. April 15th, the Ides of April 1912. Two dramatic events that seem to have nothing to do with each other happened. What are those two events? Well, let's talk about the first one. If you're a 90s kid, when I say the first one, you will immediately start thinking of Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio. Because April 15th, 1912 is the day that the Titanic sank. A horrendous disaster. 1,600 people died. Huge ship sailing from London to New York. Hit an iceberg and sunk down to the bottom of the ocean. Big event. And of course, if you're a 90s kid like I am, I think I was in the 4th grade when the big movie that everyone talked about endlessly came out. That event will forever be tied in with Hollywood. It was the movie that everyone talked about for a year and a half. Right? Nowadays, I don't think you could have a movie like that. There's so many different movies on Netflix and on the computer and on different places. People don't get excited about movies as much. But people got very, very, very excited about the Titanic movie. And it was a big deal when the movie came out when I was a kid. But it was actually a really big deal at the time that it happened. Titanic was a huge ship. And the nature of the deaths of the people on the Titanic was blatantly income related. The poor people died and the rich people got off safely. It was really blatant. They didn't have enough lifeboats. The poor people were in the bottom of the ship and they couldn't get out in time. And the rich people were up on the top and they could get out in time. And the rich people lived and the poor people died. And it was a horrendous disaster that exposed the blatant class realities of the Victorian years. U.S. imperialism and British imperialism were in ascendancy. They were preparing for World War I, which began 2 years later, the ugly imperialist conflict where the British and American and French imperialists teamed up to fight the German and Austrian and Turkish imperialists. And it was a horrendous event. The sinking of the Titanic. Awful event. Awful event. And kind of blatantly exposed the class divisions of Western civilization. It also exposed that all this great technology that they were building up was not necessarily impeccable. You could really point to the sinking of the Titanic as a really ironic way of pointing to everything we talk about on these streams, like the tendency of the falling rate of profit and overproduction, and how by creating big machines and producing goods better than ever, they were creating an economic crisis. How capitalism is the only system in history where people are hungry because there's too much food, homeless because there's too much housing, where abundance creates poverty, the problem of overproduction, the built-in problems of capitalism. You could maybe use the Titanic, this dramatic, huge technological achievement. I think at that point it was the biggest ship that had ever been built in the world up to that point. The way it sank in the middle of the Atlantic, and the way the poor suffered and the rich got bailed out. Literally, the rich got a lifeboat and the poor people drowned. You could point to the Titanic disaster as being a great analogy for where Western civilization and Western capitalism was going at the time. Right? They thought they were unsinkable. They thought that they had overcome all inequality. They'd created a brave new world with their technology. British imperialism and American imperialism was riding high, they thought, but then they hit an iceberg. So that's the first event that happened on this historic day. And there was actually a popular folk song at the time written about it. I found two versions of a populistic kind of folk song. I think Woody Guthrie eventually recorded his version of it. Pete Seeger eventually recorded another version of it. There was a popular folk song about the sinking of the Titanic. I've got two versions of it here I think you might enjoy. One of them is a little bit an attempt to add some kind of humor. I mean, I guess, right, it's been over 100 years, so it's not too soon to joke about the sinking of the Titanic. It was a horrendous disaster, but one of them is an attempt to inject some humor. The other is just a folk singer, performing this song, this populistic folk song about the sinking of the Titanic. But I'm going to play those two songs, but then we'll get to the next event because you will not believe the irony of history. So here we go.
On this day, April 14th, 1912, the great ship Titanic tragically struck an iceberg. Early in the morning of April 15th, the ship sank to the depths of the ocean, taking more than 1,500 lives. Consequently, on April 14th is Miriam's birthday, and on April 15th is Amber's birthday. And in honor of our birthdays and in memory of those who lost their lives at sea, we have prepared for you a song. Oh, they built the ship Titanic to sail the ocean blue, and they thought they had a ship that the water would never go through. But the good Lord raised his hand, saying the ship would never land. It was sad when the great ship went down. It was sad, it was sad, it was sad when the great ship went down to the bottom of the sea. Husbands and wives and children lost their lives. It was sad when the great ship went down. They were nearing Iceland shore when the water began to pour, and the rich refused to associate with the poor, so they put them down below as to be the first to go. It was sad when the great ship went down. It was sad, it was sad, so sad, it was sad when the great ship went down. To the bottom of the husbands and wives and children lost their lives. It was sad when the great ship went down. So they put the lifeboats out on the dark and stormy sea, and the band struck up, oh near my God, to thee. And the captain tried to wire, but his pants were all on fire. It was sad when the great ship went down. It was sad, so sad, it was sad, so sad, it was sad when the great ship went down to the bottom of the sea. Husbands and wives and children lost their lives. It was sad when the great ship went down. Kerplunk.
There you go. That's a great traditional American folk song commemorating the sinking of the Titanic, April 15th, 1912. Here's yet another version of it from an Australian folk musician, and then we'll get on to the irony of the sinking of the Titanic, because there's something I'm about to say that will blow your mind.
Oh, they built the ship Titanic to sail the ocean blue, and they thought they had a ship that the water would never go through. But the Lord's almighty hand knew that ship would never land. It was sad when that great ship went down. It was sad, it was sad, it was sad, it was sad. It was sad when that great ship went down to the bottom of the husbands and wives. Little children lost their lives. It was sad when that great ship went down. Oh, they sailed out from England and were not far from the shore, when the rich refused to associate with the poor. So they put them down below, where they were the first to go. It was sad when that great ship went down. It was sad, it was sad, it was sad, it was sad. It was sad when that great ship went down to the bottom of the husbands and wives. Little children lost their lives. It was sad when that great ship went down. The boat was full of water, and the sides about to burst, when the captain shouted, "Women and children first!" Oh, the captain tried to wire, but the lines were all on fire. It was sad when that great ship went down. It was sad, it was sad, it was sad, it was sad. It was sad when that great ship went down to the bottom of the husbands and wives. Little children lost their lives. It was sad when that great ship went down. Oh, they swung the lifeboats out o'er the deep and raging sea, and the band struck up with "Nearer, my God, to Thee." Little children wept and cried as the waves swept o'er the side. It was sad when that great ship went down. It was sad, it was sad, it was sad, it was sad. It was sad when that great ship went down to the bottom of the husbands and wives. Little children lost their lives. It was sad when that great ship went down. It was sad, it was sad, it was sad, it was sad. It was sad when that great ship went down to the bottom of the husbands and wives. Little children lost their lives. It was sad when that great ship went down.
So there you go. But what else happened? On April 15th, 1912, the exact same day, same month, same year, what happened? Folks, believe it or not, there's probably some people in the chat who already know this, so don't give it away. Believe it or not, April 15th, 1912 is the day that this man was born. Yes, one of the great ironies of history is that Kim Il-sung, the founder of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, was born on the exact same day that the Titanic sank. Let that sink in for a moment. On the exact same day that the Titanic sank, Kim Il-sung, the founder of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, was born. Is that not ironic? Is that not a bizarre occurrence in world history? That is really, really bizarre. Someone says, let that sink in. Ba-doom. And we got another super chat about Miami Cubans, writing it down. And yes, Kim Il-sung, the founder of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, was born on the very day that the Titanic sank. And I would argue that in a weird way, Kim Il-sung was born on Mount Paektu on the Korean Peninsula and the sinking of the Titanic are oddly connected. Why? Because of the fact that everything I just said before about the sinking of the Titanic, how the sinking of the Titanic showed that despite technological breakthroughs, despite vast higher levels of abundance being created than had ever been created before, and machines replacing labor at the assembly line, and radios being produced, and railroads and telegraph machines, and telephones, and all these great inventions, capitalism still could not get over its inherent contradictions. And you had a horrendous disaster like the sinking of the Titanic 2 years before an even bigger horrendous disaster called World War I, in which 20 million working class people were sent to their deaths. So the imperialists, the big bankers of Britain and America and France, could have a big fight with the big bankers of Germany and Turkey and Austria over who got to rule over Africa, Asia, and South America. It showed that imperialism, which is capitalism in its monopoly stage, the financial world order centered around big banks and corporations in the West, that is about keeping the world poor so that a small financial elite can stay rich, it showed the fragility and the built-in problems of this global order. And Kim Il-sung, a poor Korean, born to a poor family up on a mountain in North Korea, Kim Il-sung represented in his life the resistance to imperialism. Lenin wrote his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, arguing that it was not the capitalism of Marx's day anymore. It wasn't the capitalism of a mere factory owner and hiring workers and paying them to make the shoes and exploiting their labor. That Lenin argued that capitalism had entered its monopoly stage, imperialism. And that because of imperialism, the working class in the Western countries was stratified. It was divided between the skilled and the unskilled, the aristocracy of labor and the lower and deeper masses. And that because of this stratification, Lenin argues in his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, that the revolutionary energy in the world is no longer in Britain or France or Germany or the United States. Lenin argued that in this time, in 1916, 4 years after the Titanic sank, when he wrote his book, he argued that the revolutionary energy was in countries like Korea and China and Russia and India and African countries and South American countries. That because of the stratification and division of the working class at home, because of the fact that the capitalists of the West were not simply making profits, they were making super profits, this was leading to a situation where working class people in the colonized world were not simply being exploited, they were being super exploited. And that they were not simply being exploited as workers, but they were being exploited as a nation, that whole nations were being kept in poverty. The USA seized the Philippines, killed millions of people in order to keep the Philippines under their boot heel. Many African countries suffered at the hands of French colonialism, German colonialism, and most of all, British colonialism. And that because capitalism had moved toward its monopoly stage of imperialism, because of that, the revolutionary energy of the world was in the oppressed countries, that would be fighting for their national liberation, not their class liberation, but their national liberation. But the working class, the factory worker, the wage workers, they would be the leaders of the struggle of countries like Korea for national liberation from the imperialists. That the working class, the proletariat, would become the leader of an anti-imperialist united front to free the whole country from the grip of the imperialists. And while Karl Marx had said that all nationalism was inherently reactionary, there are no nations, there's just the workers and the bosses, Lenin said that nationalism in places like Korea can be a good thing because the Korean people are fighting for their national liberation as a people and resisting the imperialists. That's what Lenin argued. And Kim Il-sung, born on the same day that the Titanic sank, he incarnated that revolutionary movement that Lenin predicted more than anybody else. He was a Korean whose parents had fought the Japanese imperialists. And from the time Kim Il-sung was born, he was taught that it was his duty to fight for the Korean people to be free, and that led Kim Il-sung to learn about communism and become a Marxist and eventually lead a mass movement against the Japanese imperialists and eventually establish the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, face an all-out war from the United States, see his country divided at the 38th parallel, lead his country in industrialization, building steel mills, building electrification, and then, in the final years of his life, hold his country together amid the disaster that hit North Korea after the fall of the Soviet Union. Kim Il-sung died in 1994. 1994, Kim Il-sung died. And at the time that Kim Il-sung died, North Korea was in dire straits. The Soviet Union had fallen. They could not import oil, petroleum to run their food system. They were having a food crisis. But yet, in a situation like that, where any other government in the world would have just crumbled, North Korea held firm and held strong. Kim Jong-il became the leader. Many people look at that and they say, well, it's a monarchy, Caleb. This is a monarchy. You've got a king. No. Making Kim Jong-il the leader of North Korea after the death of his father was a political statement. Because you'll remember that the fall of the Soviet Union had just happened all across Europe at 1989, 1990, 91. Socialist governments had been falling. And the main way these socialist governments had fallen is the U.S. media would whip up the idea that there were hardliners in the party and moderates in the party and try to divide the communist parties. Gorbachev was the moderate. Brezhnev was the hardliner. They would sow division in the communist parties. North Korea did not want to collapse the way the countries of the Eastern Bloc did. And so by putting Kim Jong-il, the son of Kim Il-sung, in leadership, they said there are no divisions. There's no hardliners in North Korea. There's no moderates in North Korea. There's just the revolutionary line of Kim Il-sung, which we are now continuing by putting his son in charge. And in fact, many people have pointed out that the reason that the cult of personality if you want to call it that, of Kim Il-sung was so big. The reason it exploded during the 1970s was because of the Sino-Soviet split. There were obviously some people in North Korea that liked the Soviet Union and didn't like China. There were some people in China who didn't like, some people in North Korea who liked China and didn't like the Soviet Union. And what they called the Cultural Revolution in North Korea, very different than the Chinese Cultural Revolution, completely different thing, where they put Kim Il-sung's picture up everywhere and they really built up Kim Il-sung-ism. That was largely based on the need to say, we have a great leader here in North Korea. We have Kim Il-sung, so we're not Maoists. We're not Soviet revisionists or Soviet communists. We are just practicing the Juche ideology, the Juche interpretation of Marxism-Leninism. It served a purpose. And Kim Jong-un, the current leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un is a continuation of that. By putting him in charge, they're also saying that nothing has changed, that the bloodline remains the same. Kim Il-sung's revolutionary line of defeating U.S. imperialism, of raising the Korean people out of poverty, of peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula, that line remains intact, that the Korean Workers' Party has not wavered from that position. They remain the same revolutionary party that drove the U.S. imperialists out in the 1950s, the early 50s, that drove the Japanese out in the 1940s, that fought up in the mountains and organized guerrilla warfare in the 1930s and 1920s. The same organization that sent weapons and guns to the Palestinians, the same mass movement that sent weapons and financial support to Nelson Mandela in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, the same revolutionary organization that sent its forces to stand with various anti-colonial liberation fighters, that provided bodyguards to Robert Mugabe as he was trying to break Zimbabwe out of the colonial regime of Rhodesia, the same revolutionary government that welcomed the Black Panthers as heroes, gave a huge parade to the Black Panthers that the Black Panthers loved, that they are that North Korea. And that they're never going to do what Khrushchev did in the Soviet Union. When Khrushchev got up and threw Stalin under the bus. 1956, when Khrushchev got up and he said, you know that guy who came before me, Stalin? That guy who led you to defeat Hitler? That guy who led you to raise the country up from poverty? That guy who held the country together and you all, rallied behind. He became the symbol of our fight for freedom and our fight against the Nazi invaders, and the guy who enabled us to get to the point we could launch spacecraft and made us an industrial superpower. You know that guy who became the symbol of everything that we've been through for the past 30, 40 years? That man, Stalin, who became the incarnation of what our state and our country was like, that symbolic leader, that patriarchal father figure who we all rallied around and made so many sacrifices for, so many hardships for, that individual who was not a god, was a man, that man who we chose to be our leader, that man that we looked up to while we fought for our lives and made sacrifices and worked really hard to build up our country. You know what? That man was a shit. That's what Khrushchev did. He got up in front of the whole Soviet Union and he took a dump on Joseph Stalin. And you want to talk about demoralization. You want to talk about an epic stab in the back to the Soviet Union. You want to talk about an event that psychologically scarred the Soviet people, that weakened the global communist movement. That was it. No, that's not to say Stalin was flawless. Obviously, lots of bad things happened on Stalin's watch. The Great Terror of 1937, a lot of innocent people going to gulags. You know, World War II, maybe they could have managed that better. You know, I mean, there's many criticisms. The Soviet Union was a very authoritarian place. Didn't have freedom of speech, freedom of assembly in the same way we have it, right? I mean, there's plenty of criticism that can be made of the Soviet Union and Stalin's leadership. But when a country has been through all of that, through a horrendous war that killed 27 million people, through a rapid industrialization, when people have gone out and sacrificed and struggled, and you had one man who became the symbol, Stalin, and he dies. And a couple of years after he dies, the new leader of the country gets up and says, hey, you know that guy that we've been worshiping for the last 40 years? He was a lying mass murderer. Everything our enemies said about him was true. He was a horrible person. When Khrushchev did that, it scarred the Soviet people, and it set in an atmosphere of demoralization that set the stage for the fall of the Soviet Union. And in North Korea, they saw that. They had criticism of Stalin. But they determined that when Kim Il-sung died, especially in 1994, when they were facing a food crisis, when they were surrounded, they would never do to Kim Il-sung what Khrushchev did to Stalin. They weren't going to make the mistake of demoralizing their people. Instead, they were going to put his son in charge and say, look, our great leader, the father of our country, the George Washington of North Korea, which is what Kim Il-sung is, right? He's the national liberation hero, the founding father of Korea. He may be dead, but his son is in charge. Oh, and his son may have died. Well, now his grandson's in charge. It is a political statement. That's what you need to understand. And that leading millions of people to hold together a socialist society with nuclear weapons threatening them every day and sanctions crushing their economy means you can't always do things free and open. People look at that and they say, well, that's not fair. They should have just had an election to figure out who the best guy for the job was. That's not fair that they picked Kim Il-sung's son and Kim Il-sung's grandson. Yeah, maybe it's not fair. Maybe it's not fair in the grand scheme of things. But under the circumstances that the North Koreans are in, still technically at war with the United States, surrounded, under attack, it makes sense why the North Koreans are doing that. Makes sense why they've done it. It's not a monarchy. It's a socialist society that is heavily militarized and under attack and fighting for its life. And I am absolutely dedicated to standing in solidarity with the Korean people. I don't think life is a paradise in North Korea. Life is very difficult in North Korea. That country is up against a lot of hardship. And it's our responsibility as people living here in America. It is our responsibility to do everything we can to try and create a situation for the Korean people that's better. That means moving toward peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula, demilitarization of the Korean Peninsula. Bring the U.S. troops home. Let the people in the South and the people in the North have a unified government, and let every political party, the Korean Workers' Party, and all the parties in the South, let them all be part of that government. Let the Korean people be united. And let North Korea get some foreign investment. Let North Korea do business on the international market. Let them start utilizing those mineral resources up in the mountains. Let the North Korean people start exporting those cell phones they make all by themselves. Let the North Korean people start doing the amazing things with technology that they can do. If you want to help the North Koreans, don't give me this. People want to give me all these horror stories. Park, etc. All these horror stories that are completely unverified. Okay, fine. right? Let's imagine that all those horror stories are true. Let's imagine that all those things are true. Are you helping the Korean people by isolating them, by cutting them off from the global market, by keeping them in poverty, by pointing nuclear weapons at them, by rehearsing the all-out destruction of the country as the USA just did with the war games? Of course not. You're not helping them. You're not helping them. If you want to help the Korean people, let them get some foreign investment. Let the U.S. troops in South Korea go home. Let them talk with their country folk in the South. Let them move toward being treated as a real country. It's respected in the international community. Create a situation where they could not have to have nuclear weapons anymore, where they could get rid of nuclear weapons. That's what you should do if you want to help the Korean people. Do you want to help the Korean people? I don't care if you think North Korea is the most evil government in the world. If you really want to help the Korean people, you should be helping the Center for Political Innovation move toward the peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. You should be helping build an anti-imperialist and anti-war movement here in the United States, marching with libertarians, marching with the People's Party, marching with Jimmy Dore and anybody else, marching with Donald Trump and anyone else who wants to move away from the dangerous situation, war on the Korean Peninsula. If you want to help the Korean people, and if you just want to hate on North Korea, if you just want to threaten North Korea, if you just want to make life harder there, be honest about what you're doing. But if you really care about the Korean people, you should want to finish what Trump started. Finish what Trump started. June 30th, 2019 was a great day. That was the day that for the first time a sitting U.S. president and the president of North Korea shook hands. It was absolutely epic. And the Center for Political Innovation, we have continued to raise the slogan, finish what Trump started, peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. And in fact, I'm going to show video real quick. You've seen this video before, but it's worth watching again. This was us at the White House back in March. This is the CPI at the White House. How did this stop? This was a great moment. June 30th, 2019. The leader of People's Korea and the leader of the United States shook hands. They met, the first president ever to visit the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. We had Donald Trump trying to make peace with a country that is still technically at war with the United States. Donald Trump was trying to open the door to peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. There would be hope to bring the troops home from South Korea. There would be hope that there could be denuclearization, that North Korea wouldn't feel threatened anymore, that there could be no more bombs and weapons, and the people of Korea could reunify. And Donald Trump going to People's Korea was sabotaged. It was sabotaged by John Bolton and the neocons, the same forces that got us into Ukraine, the same forces that are escalating and pushing buttons against China and Taiwan on the Taiwan Strait, the same forces that want World War III sabotaged the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. We're here to say, finish what Trump started. We want peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. We want U.S. leaders and the leaders of People's Korea to sit down. We would like to see trade between the United States and People's Korea. We would like to see those railroads in South Korea that have been built. We'd like to see them in action and see the Korean people trading with each other. We don't want war. We don't want money wasted on international confrontations. And we also don't want a police state. And at the same time that the big bankers who control Joe Biden, the Silicon Valley monopolists and fascists, the same forces that control Joe Biden, are waging a war not just around the world, but against the American people. They are driving our country into poverty. Our trains are derailing. People are breathing in deadly chemicals. The water is not properly purified. Jobs are falling apart. Schools are falling apart. It's a nightmare. They have waged a war against us. And instead of rebuilding America, they're trying to move toward a low-wage police state. That's what they're doing here. So there you go. There you go, folks. That was us out in front of the White House. So I think that it is necessary to rewrite the lyrics to that song that I just played for you all. I think we should, since we're talking about the same day in history, I would write it. I would say, it was great. It was great. It was great when Kim Il Sung was born. He was born on Mount Pac-2. He's a friend of me and you. It was great when Kim Il Sung was born. There you go. Someone else write some verses to that. It was great. It was great. It was great when Kim Il Sung was born. He was born on Mount Pac-2. He's a friend of me and you. It was great when Kim Il Sung was born. And thank you, Lisa. I'd be happy just to see bike trails in America. Well, there you go, Lisa. There you go. There you go. But listen, folks, North Korea, I'm going to tell you where I was today, because this is actually related to where I was today and stuff like that. I got a lot of things to say. All right. So first we're going to write, Lisa wants to see bike trails. To just see bike trails in America. Welcome back. And then we got another super chat here. Many people still believe that Cubans escaped their country in small rafts. Same for North Koreans. People are too brainwashed. Right. All righty. Just writing down the super chats as they come in. But listen, folks, I wanted to show you before we do anything, right? This is the North Korean national anthem being performed in North Korea. This is the North Korean national anthem being performed, and it's a beautiful rendition of it. Yeah, it is just a beautiful rendition of it. And that'll get me to a couple other things I want to say about all of this before I make the big announcement, and then we go to our roll call and I start answering super chats. So this is the North Korean national anthem. It's called the Patriotic Song. there you go. Folks, I don't know if you saw, but over the weekend, YouTube banned all North Korean vloggers. All North Koreans that have YouTube channels got their YouTube channels taken down. Why? Because they said the YouTube channels, there was only like 4 of them. The YouTube channels from North Korea had a positive bias toward their country. Now, can you think of more of a bullshit reason to take a YouTube channel down than saying that it has a positive bias toward the country of its origin? One of these YouTube channels belonged to an 11-year-old girl who was learning to speak English. She's 11 years old. She was learning to speak English. And when her channel opened up, CNN did a hit piece on her. And I covered it here on this channel. She goes by Olivia Natasha. And that's obviously not her Korean name. And they took Olivia Natasha's YouTube channel down because they said that Olivia Natasha, 11-year-old Olivia Natasha, has a positive bias toward her country. Now, what did Olivia's channel look like? Was she wearing a military uniform and saying, "Long live Kim Il-sung and kill my enemies"? No. We showed some of her stuff on this channel before. We showed some of her clips. Olivia, she talked about going to the water park with her friends. She talked about how much she loved Harry Potter books. I guess she's transphobic, right? Is she transphobic? I mean, that must have been what it was, right? She was transphobic. Just kidding. No, she loved Harry Potter books. Still does. She's on Twitter still. She loved Harry Potter books. Loves Harry Potter books. She loves going fishing with her grandpa. She has a whole video about going fishing with her grandpa. And they banned her YouTube channel. They banned it along with like 3 or 4 other YouTube channels. They banned it from YouTube, citing a positive bias toward her home country. It is unbelievable. Unbelievable. You want to talk about a blatant act of censorship? Why can 11-year-old Olivia not have a YouTube channel to talk about her own country? Right? I mean, I am just, it is appalling to me. Go and follow her on Twitter. Now that she's banned from YouTube, go and follow her on Twitter. She needs more Twitter followers. Go and follow Olivia, little Olivia, on Twitter. Olivia Natasha Yumi, right? Yumi is her Korean name. Go and follow her on Twitter because she's still making videos for Twitter. She's still making videos for Twitter, and she is still awesome. She is still awesome, and what has been done to her, okay, fine. Not everyone in North Korea has a YouTube channel. They've got this embargo and sanctions, and, not everyone, has the time or the money to have a YouTube channel. But what do they expect an 11-year-old girl when she makes a YouTube channel? What do they expect her to do? What do they expect her to do? Like make a YouTube video of like, oh, I hate my own country. It's a shithole here. Right? Is that what they expected her to do? To be like, my country is a shithole. I hope America bombs and invades my country to free me from evil communism. Do they really expect that an 11-year-old girl in North Korea is going to do that? I don't think so. But I guess that's what they wanted. That's what's allowed, right? Because she has a positive bias. A positive bias toward her own country. A positive bias toward her own country. I mean, you can't make this up. It's so stupid. So stupid. I'm going to show you a couple of her videos. A couple of the videos that YouTube banned, from her YouTube channel, right? This is a video she did showing seasonal clothes that women wear in North Korea. And thank you for the super chat, Lisa. I'm glad you like it. You know, this was like one of the videos she posted like yesterday. She did a video on seasonal clothes that women wear, the seasonal clothing of women in North Korea. This is just horrendous propaganda, right? This is the extreme trigger warning, viewers. YouTube thinks you can't handle this. This is extreme totalitarian communist propaganda. You can't handle this. Get ready. Get ready. Cover your children's eyes. You're about to see something that is so vile and extreme. It must be banned from YouTube. It is so extreme. I mean, are you ready? This is, oh my God. Oh my God. This is her video on women's clothing in North Korea. Get ready. Hold yourself. It's going to be, this is the extreme vile content YouTube felt necessary to ban. Here we go. There you go, folks. That is what YouTube felt a need to ban. I'll show you another video that she made. Here, just give me a second to pull it up here. I'll show you another video. That they banned. This is another one of the recent videos from Yumi's YouTube channel that just got taken down by YouTube because it's got a positive bias toward North Korea. And this is yet another one of the videos, right? This is one of her videos that we had to be protected from. YouTube just had to protect us from this vile content. So here we'll show yet another video that we are not allowed to see by YouTube, right? YouTube just felt this was just too extreme. Here we go. You ready? That's it. She went to the horse riding place. She didn't ride the horse because she was too scared, so she ended up feeding the horse. The video is 43 seconds long. This is the vile North Korean propaganda. You know, I mean, let's watch it again. Maybe we can analyze it, right? So like she's feeding the horse, and the horse represents the Korean people and their struggle against U.S. imperialism. And she's feeding it because she's feeding the vulgar Americans propaganda to destroy them psychologically. It's all a big North Korean psychological operation. She ended up feeding the horse rather than riding it. Yes. I mean, this is the vile North Korean propaganda that YouTube felt we couldn't watch. This is so utterly ridiculous, right? Yumi, Olivia, Natasha, this is what they tried to protect us from seeing. Now, I mean, I can't think of a bigger outrage. Why in the world can Olivia Natasha, 11-year-old Olivia, not have a YouTube channel? This is so criminal, right? I think Olivia deserves to be able to have a YouTube channel. And yeah, I'm just outraged that YouTube tells us that she's not allowed to have a positive bias toward her own country when her country is the most demonized country in the world. Olivia was daring to show us North Koreans going to the water park, North Koreans eating popsicles, North Koreans feeding their horses, North Koreans wearing different outfits. That's not allowed. That's not allowed. And that is, you want to talk about bias and propaganda and social media manipulation. Restore Yumi's YouTube channel now. Go and subscribe to Yumi. Go follow her on Twitter and share her videos. I'm going to share the horse video right now. Go and follow her on Twitter and do everything we can to support North Korea, to support People's Korea, to support peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. That is something we're all about at the Center for Political Innovation, which brings me to the next thing that I want to talk about here. The next thing that I want to talk about. So I went to an event today at the United Nations. People may have seen, I posted a couple shorts from it. It was interesting. The folks who put on the New York City Peace March that happened a few weeks back, May 27th, they invited me to a beautiful reception at the United Nations headquarters. So I took a couple little shorts with my phone from this beautiful hall. It was amazing, right? We were there. It was great. It was a great event. There were people from a number of different churches, people from Mount Sinai Worship Center, people from various churches. Bishop Moise, who's a Haitian minister, he was there. There was an NYPD police officer who's also a minister. He was there. There were people there from different ethnic groups. It was a really, really great reception about how they want to build a peace movement and eventually build a monument at the United Nations to commemorate both sides in the Korean War. And so I just have a couple clips. Folks will remember I went on Laurie Spencer's channel with a guy named Reverend Milhan Stevens. He was one of the speakers. So I got like a couple clips from that, the event I went to today, and then we can get to our big announcement. But I just want to show you the couple clips. Couple clips from the UN event. So yeah, we'll do that. Hold on. So this is the first clip. This was the opening prayer at the peace luncheon at the UN headquarters.
For a purpose. Lord, you breathe your breath on us, Lord God. And you breathe that breath that we should use that breath with a purpose. And that purpose is to serve you in spirit and in truth. We come with a cause today. A cause
in this
for you.
Beautiful hall just overlooking the river at the United Nations headquarters. And I got one more video of that. And it was of Reverend Milhan. He gave a very beautiful address. He actually talked about me in his speech. He mentioned my speech. He's like, my friend Caleb loves communism. My church, we don't like communism, but we've been getting to know each other. He gave me a shout out in the speech at the UN event. I was blown away. Here at this building where they've got diplomats from around the world, this minister invites me to this reception at the UN with all these diplomats and others. And then he gives me a shout out in the speech. And he even mentions that I'm a communist in the speech. And he says, my friend Caleb loves communism. We're getting to know each other. It was really beautiful. I'll just show you a clip. He doesn't say, I didn't get that part on video. I'm sure there's a video somewhere, but I'll just show you some of Milhan's speech at the UN today. Here we go. So this was him speaking at the UN reception. This is Reverend Milhan, who
the son and the daughter are all coming together, the mothers, and I want to multiply that. So that there's not one person left on earth that hasn't felt Bishop Lewis's pain, that feels your pain, that you carry around. So there's ways you can help. Okay, number one, sign the petition. You can do that on nypeacemarch.com. It's very easy to do. It takes like 2 minutes.
Yeah, those are the great folks from NewYorkPeaceMarch.com who put on this event, and they are for peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. They're also for gang reconciliation in Haiti, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful event. A very diverse group of people. They were really happy to have me there. They were really happy to have people, they love the CPI. I was there introduced as a representative of the Center for Political Innovation. We were honored guests at this UN reception that we had today at the United Nations headquarters. CPI was welcomed. We were there alongside Haitians, alongside Koreans, alongside people of Japanese heritage, alongside representatives of all kinds of nonprofits and important organizations in New York City, all talking about nypeacemarch.com. So yeah, if you're interested in what those folks are doing, nypeacemarch.com. That was pretty neat to go there and represent the Center for Political Innovation at the UN headquarters. That's how I spent my early afternoon today. I went to the nypeacemarch.com luncheon at the UN headquarters. It was certainly an interesting experience. I got a lot of business cards from a lot of different people I never would have met, right? There was a couple of people there who do like marketing and branding, a couple that run a marketing and branding company. There was some people who work with a museum in New Jersey. Two individuals, one of whom is actually the director of a museum in New Jersey. That they were very cool. So yeah, it was really, really a great event with Pastor Stevens. He put on a great event, and he wasn't the only pastor there. Bishop Moise and a number of different clergymen, Jewish religious leaders from the Mount Sinai Worship Center. There were Russian Orthodox and Ukrainian Orthodox leaders there. It was a small, little, beautiful reception at the UN headquarters. So I just wanted to share that with all of you and give a shout out to the great folks at NewYorkPeaceMarch.com for the great work that they're doing. And despite whatever differences, they are for peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. They want to finish what Trump started. So does CPI. And on that basis, they were really happy that we brought our crew to their rally that they did May 27th. And then they invited me to this event at the United Nations. And it worked out. I was worried something would happen with work and I wouldn't be able to go, but events aligned, the stars aligned, as they say, and I ended up there. The United Nations always approved sanctions on North Korea. Okay. Super chats are always appreciated, and I'll be answering them in the second half. But now, before I get to the roll call, before we get to the second half, now has come the very special time in this program in which I announce the big announcement. Are you ready for the big announcement? The big announcement is about to happen. I am about to give a big announcement. It is a really, really big announcement. It is a gigantic, tremendous announcement. Tonight, I am going to announce that the next CPI event, the next live in-person CPI event, is happening on July 10th. It's called Money and American Injustice: How the U.S. Legal System Targets the Poor. And it will be taking place at 7 p.m. at 4 West 43rd Street. That's right in that UN Times Square area, Midtown Manhattan. Speakers will be Jose Vega. Remember Jose, the great disruptor who stands up for peace. Chris Halali of the American Student Union. You all know him. He ran for Congress in Vermont. Nick Brana of the People's Party, good friend of mine, recently, launched the Cornel West campaign, did a lot to make that launch. I'll be speaking. And it's going to be a great event. We'll have some special guest attorneys, that are coming to speak about the issue of money and American injustice and how the U.S. legal system targets the poor. So if you're in the New York, New Jersey area, or if you can make the trip, please come to New York City for our event that is going to be happening. It'll be happening on July 10th. Money and American injustice, how the U.S. legal system targets the poor. Be there. Be there. It is going to be a great event. There's going to be music. There's going to be speeches. And Peter Coffin is making a documentary of it. Peter Coffin is going to make one of his amazing films, documentaries of it. It's going to be an all-around good time. So here we go. July 10th. Be there. Be there on July 10th. It's going to be a great event. And we are going to be having an anti-war protest earlier in the day. Earlier in the day, we'll be having an anti-war protest. So we will be assembling at 3 p.m. earlier in the day, and I'll have that announcement also. Before the event starts in the afternoon, we're going to be marching through the streets of New York City saying peace with Russia, peace with China. And then we'll have a break and we'll settle down, and then we'll have our great evening panel with Nick Brana, with Chris Halali, with Jose Vega, with 2 special guest attorneys, maybe 3. We're working on a 3rd special guest attorney. Fingers crossed. We're working on securing our special guest attorneys. And in addition to that, I'll be speaking, and everyone who comes will get a copy of my new book, Where is America Going? You'll all get a copy of my new book if you come. And you'll get to meet other people from the CPI and from the Schiller Institute and the People's Party and the Rage Against the War Machine Coalition. It's going to be awesome. So if you're in the area, mark your calendar for Monday, July 10th, 7 p.m. We'll be having our event in New York City. It'll be great. So be there. Be there. I'd love to meet you. I'll be there. I'll be speaking. I've got plenty to say on this topic, as I'm sure many of you also do. So be there. Jose Vega, Chris Halali, Nick Brana, and special guest attorneys, Peter Coffin. I'll be there. Others will be there. It's going to be a great Center for Political Innovation conference, mini conference that we are having on July 10th. And we'll be announcing the location of the anti-war protest we'll be doing earlier in the day. We're going to, outside in the streets of New York, we're going to have an anti-war protest and rally beforehand. It's going to be a great time. It'll be a great time for everybody. So be there. Be there. We really would love to have you there. So there you go. That was the big announcement. And on that note, I can now start calling people out as I see them. Names and locations. Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. Who is with us tonight? Who is in the chat? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Who's in the chat? I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? And then I'll start answering your super chat questions. You got more super chats, shoot them my way. We got Lawrence Johnson in Chicago, Scott in North Miami, Sarah in Toronto, Seneca, Valen Anderson, Patrick in Maine, Ryan in Kansas City, Springfield, Massachusetts, Samuel, Colin in Greensboro, Zach in Bunch, Richmond, Virginia, Ram in Toronto, John McCarthy in Chicago, Chris in Salt Lake City, Balthazar in Oakland, Gabby in Chicago. Shout out to you, Gabby. Killian in Milwaukee. Shout out to you, Killian. Killian's awesome. You don't know how awesome Killian is. He's a brilliant actor and a knowledgeable person and just a great guy. I got to meet Killian this weekend at the retreat. It was really, really great. Alan Rise in South Korea, Adam Wayne in Las Vegas, Tony in Tasmania. Peter is in Florida, the great Peter Coffin, but he's excited to be making a documentary in New York City very soon. Yes, he is. Jenny in Cincinnati, Jenny Lynn, shout out to you. Adam Wayne in Las Vegas, Alan Rise in South Korea, Tony from Tasmania. There you go. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? And I will now start answering super chat questions. That's the next thing I got here on the agenda, is to answer super chat questions. Daphne in Alabama, Micah in Las Vegas, Bob Troy in New York, Pios in Catalonia, Spain. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, so now I'm going to start answering super chat questions. The first one's about affirmative action. Big deal, the Supreme Court ruling. Well, you know what, folks? Affirmative action, in theory, is a good thing, because the idea is to give representation to historically marginalized groups, people who've been underrepresented, and to kind of boost certain groups, to balance out the boost people get for being white, for being male, etc. That's the idea. However, many people have noticed that the way affirmative action is administered has a lot of problems with it. Asian Americans get completely screwed by affirmative action. They do. Asian Americans are very high achieving. They have high test scores and high grades, etc. And affirmative action is rigged against them. Well, that's bullshit. That's not fair. Why should a group, an ethnic group, a minority, underrepresented group in the United States get penalized, right? Jose is going to be there. Your speech better be a good one, or else he will interrupt. Very good. Very good. Writing it down. That's good. That's good. But the way affirmative action has been administered has presented a lot of problems. Asian Americans have been screwed by affirmative action. They haven't been fairly treated. And many people have pointed out that in many workplaces, the way affirmative action is administered, it's like they can only give to some by taking from others. It should be administered in a way that brings up everybody, starting with those who suffer the most. So I'm not against affirmative action as a concept. I think it's a good idea to give special attention to groups that have been marginalized. I think it's a great idea. And, the idea that somehow having it at all is racist, I don't buy that. No, I don't buy the idea that affirmative action is reverse racism or anything like that. I don't buy that. I do think that affirmative action is a good thing in theory. I do think that the way it has been practiced in many instances, in many workplaces and in college admissions, the way it affects Asian Americans is complete bullshit. I do think that. I can understand why there's a backlash against it. The Yellow Knight, Douglas Kim, brilliant guy. We interviewed him. His life was greatly impacted by affirmative action. He did not get into Harvard University because he's Asian, right? And go and watch the great panel I did about it with Douglas Kim. He talked about it, how he didn't get into Harvard because he's Asian, because affirmative action is set up to discriminate against Asian Americans. It says that they're too high performing, and it basically penalizes them for being Asian. Well, that's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. Asians are a minority. They're a group that has been the victim of hate crimes. They're a group that is discriminated against. So why should we have affirmative action systems that discriminate against Asian Americans? It's just wrong. It's just wrong. Right? Maybe we need affirmative action policies that help African Americans, that help Latinos. I'm for that. But if you set it up in a way that it hurts Asian Americans, a group that's historically been marginalized, that's not good. Social mobility is a built-in idea in America. In America, anyone can become a millionaire. That's the idea. Anyone can be, you're born in poverty, you're born in a log cabin, but anyone can just go out and work really hard and become rich. Well, we all know that's not actually the truth. Things are rigged. And affirmative action is supposed to be a way to make it less rigged. But in reality, the problem is rooted in the system. It's not rooted, it's not, affirmative action is one of those band-aids. It's one of those magical solutions that people point to, right? Well, if we just have the right policy where we give certain people certain points for their ethnicity, if we do that, that'll solve things. Obviously, it hasn't done that. So if affirmative action was the answer, it would have solved things by now. Perhaps it's opened some doors to historically marginalized people. I'm not against that. Not against that at all. So there you go. Wow, another super chat. Your segment on memes about killing reminded me back when I was young. I used to harass people online, responding to them with offensive memes like free helicopter rides. But I changed, and now I'm the one being attacked. Writing it down. All right. Well, I have a lot to say about that, Battle Cossack, because I think that's a really important point that you just made. But now let's get to the next question. Who are the Miami Cubans and what's their history? Well, one thing that many people will point out that is not widely known or acknowledged about Cuban and American history is that before the Cuban Revolution, there were many Cuban Americans who lived in the United States. The most famous poet in Cuba's history was Jose Marti. Jose Marti is the national figure of Cuba. He wrote poetry and was kind of the soul of the Cuban people. And he spent most of his life living in New York City because he had to flee Cuba. The dictatorship in Cuba under Batista forced him out of the country. And Jose Marti wrote some of his most beautiful poetry while living in exile in New York City, longing for his homeland. And when Fidel Castro came to power, at first the United States supported him. And many people don't realize this, but Batista, the dictator, had been backed by the United States. But Fidel Castro, who'd been in prison, Fidel Castro attempted to lead an uprising. He launched his attack on the Moncada barracks. It failed. He was put on trial for trying to violently overthrow the government, waging insurrection. He was thrown in prison, and he gave a speech before the court. History will absolve me was the name of his speech. He was thrown in prison, but because he was from a really, really wealthy family, because his father and others were real connected in the military, eventually they let him out of jail. And Fidel Castro then, fled to Mexico. And in Mexico, he met Che Guevara. And then he went back to Cuba and launched an armed uprising. And after a couple of years, they won. Towards the end of the Civil War in Cuba, the U.S. government started supporting Fidel Castro. True story. Right? Originally, they'd been supporting Batista, but they thought at the last minute, they said, hey, this Fidel guy is going to win. He's very charismatic. His radio broadcasts, people like him. So because of that, the U.S. government started supporting Fidel Castro at the last minute. And right after Fidel Castro came to power, he toured the United States. There were parades for him. A lot of Cuban Americans marched in the streets supporting Fidel Castro. They thought he was a hero. Dwight Eisenhower, the U.S. president, said he was the Thomas Jefferson and the George Washington of Cuba. And for about 2 seconds, the U.S. government pretended they liked Fidel Castro. But then Fidel Castro went back to Cuba and he started nationalizing things, nationalizing industries. And by 1962, he announced that they were going to make Cuba a socialist nation. So the USA obviously stopped liking Cuba, tried to violently overthrow him with the Bay of Pigs invasion. The rest is history. But what many people don't realize is that a lot of the Cubans who were living in Miami and in New York City and in other parts of the country went back to Cuba after Fidel took power. No one ever talks about that. They only talk about the Cubans who left when Fidel came to power. And that's the Miami Cubans, right? That's the Miami Cuban exiles, thousands of them, right? The people who fled Fidel Castro, hate communism, hard right-wingers. But no one talks about the thousands and thousands of Cubans who returned to Cuba because they liked Fidel. And, weird story, one of those Cubans was Ted Cruz's dad. Ted Cruz's father admits he was living in Louisiana and New Orleans, and he was a young Cuban American, and he loved him some Fidel Castro. He loved Fidel. and he joined the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. And that's where that photograph of Ted Cruz's dad, along with Lee Harvey Oswald, comes from. Ted Cruz's dad was a Cuban American. He was one of the Cuban Americans who liked Castro, and he passed out leaflets for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. He apparently was at the same place and was photographed. It's a real photograph of him with Lee Harvey Oswald, the man who was eventually, found to be the shooter of President Kennedy. And the story goes that Ted Cruz's dad returned to Cuba, didn't like communism in Cuba. He was disenchanted with communism, and he became an evangelical minister and came back to the United States. Very weird story. But there were many Cuban Americans who looked up to Fidel Castro, who supported him. And after he'd been in power for a little bit, they returned to Cuba. And you never hear about those Cuban Americans. There was kind of a changing of the guard. The Cubans, the revolutionary Cubans who'd fled, all went home. And the right-wing Cubans, the wealthy Cubans who lost their plantations, etc., they went to the United States. There was a changing of the guard. And that's worth pointing out. Now, at this point, though, it's, to be fair, not all Cuban Americans. There are Cubans who come here to the United States. And they don't come on rafts mostly. They just come on a plane. And there are some Cubans that have come to the United States to become U.S. citizens who still support Castro. They're not members of the Communist Party. They're not going around advocating communism. And they're a minority of Cuban Americans, to be sure. But there are, I've met, there are Cubans in New York City. There are Cubans around the country who are people who made the decision to move to the United States for their job, for whatever, but they say Fidel's a great guy. They go back and they visit their relatives and they come back. So the Miami crowd, the people who fled Cuba, they do not represent all Cuban Americans, and they don't represent all Cubans. They certainly don't represent all Cubans because most Cubans didn't leave. The bulk of the Cuban people didn't flee. They didn't leave the country. Those who did, and set up shop in Miami, the hard Miami right wing, they are probably the majority of Cuban Americans, but there's a growing minority of Cuban Americans who don't feel that way. And on top of that, it's a generational thing. Yes, the people who actually fled Cuba and their kids that they had here in the United States who grew up hearing anti-communism their whole lives, they are virulent anti-communists. There's a guy named Luis Posada Carriles who bombed an airplane that killed a bunch of school children, and the USA held him in the United States, and they gave refuge to a terrorist who blew up an airplane and killed a bunch of innocent Cuban, school kids. Luis Posada Carriles, you can Google it. It's just an unbelievable case. But there's a lot of Cubans who their grandparents fled communism, and their parents are hard right Republicans, and there's a lot of young Cuban Americans, third generation. They don't care. They just don't care. They're not communists, but they're not flaming anti-communist either. They just don't care. And that's one thing they've noted. There's a lot of Miami Cubans who vote for the Democrats rather than the Republicans. There's a lot of Miami Cubans who thought it was a good thing when Barack Obama went to Cuba and opened relations. They thought it was a good thing because they said, that'll make it easier for me to go visit my relatives. Maybe I can send my relatives some money and, help them out. There is a growing crowd of children, descendants of Miami Cubans who don't have this anti-communist stick up their butt, to be crude, right? They don't have this, I want to kill the commies, right? They don't have that. There's a growing number of Cuban Americans who that's in their family, that's in their blood, but they don't care. Right? Just like, there's a lot of Hungarians in Cleveland. There's a lot of people in Cleveland who their parents are from Hungary, or their grandparents are from Hungary that fled in 1956 during the Hungarian uprising. And if you ask them, what do you think about communism? They're like, I don't know. I don't care. Right? There's a lot of Hungarians in Cleveland, but, that don't have this anti-communist bias. What do you think of Che Guevara? Good question. So that's important. That's important to note. So there you go. Hope that was helpful. Next question. And I appreciate the super chats. What is your take on the lack of discussion and growth and energy among candidates other than Trump? Well, look, I think that is the issue right now, and that Donald Trump, that is part of his appeal. He taps into people's desire to build. That quantum leap speech that Donald Trump gave was amazing, where he talked about building model cities, drawing up proposals to build model cities. That was utterly, utterly amazing during 2018. I wanted to fit in with people who joked about, okay, all right, don't worry, Battle. Very good, writing it down. So, yeah, I mean, there you go. So yeah, I mean, Donald Trump is tapping into that energy, and libertarians have a lot of that energy too. They want to build, they want to construct, they want to get things done, they want to go out and build things. That's very, very libertarian. That's very, very, and so we need to find a way to engage with people, right? We growth is the issue now. Are you going to be a pessimist? Are you going to be hopeless? Are you going to try to build a brave new world, right? And we need to get people to understand that capitalism and the rule of profits and the imperialists and the warmongers and the big monopolies, they are the main barrier to growth. And that socialism, when it comes to America, is going to be all about growth. It's going to be about getting this country to build once again, kind of like how the Soviet Union built itself up from nothing, how China built itself up from nothing. That growth in our time, when capitalism is in decay, requires socialist central planning. And the goal is to build so much that we can get to a stateless, classless world of vast abundance. That's the goal. We want to build, build, build. We want to build so high that we can see inequality break down, the very need for the state to break down. So we need to find a way to enter pro-growth spaces. Now, I don't quite know what this next one from Lisa says. I'd be happy to see bike trails in America. Welcome back. Well, bikes, I mean, biking is fun. I rode a bike when I was a kid. My wife has a bike. It's right over there. My wife's bicycle. You can't see it. It's not on the camera. I'm not against biking. I mean, sometimes, people joke about the bikeoids and the people that are anti-car and anti-growth. But at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with bicycling. Bicycling is fine, right? It's a great way to exercise, great way to get around. It's fun. I mean, I think biking is great. Sorry, y'all. I just sometimes, didn't get much sleep last night, but that's okay. Yeah, I don't quite get what you're getting at there with the bikes, Lisa, but I'm for it. Many people think Koreans escape their country in small rafts. Many are too brainwashed. Yeah, there was that case in the 90s. In the 90s, things in Cuba were pretty bad, because of the Soviet Union falling. They didn't have an economic partner, and they had a lot of economic hardship in the 90s. Electricity was limited and stuff. Things have gotten much better in Cuba. But in the 90s in Cuba, things were pretty bad. And there was that famous case of that boy, Elian Gonzalez, whose mother took him on a raft to get out of Cuba. And she died. And so the debate was, are they going to send him back to Cuba or not? And it was a big thing. I mean, the whole Cuba thing, it's wild. There were the Mariella boat lifts during the Carter administration, where Jimmy Carter arranged for all kinds of anti-communist Cubans to flee Cuba. And so Fidel opened up all the mental hospitals and all the prisons, and he just dumped them all on the United States. And it was, Cuba kind of took advantage of the United States. The USA, they were saying, oh, communism in Cuba is so horrible, everyone wants to leave. And Fidel's like, yeah, exactly. Here you go. And you can have all the prisoners in the jails. You can have them. And you can have all the people in the mental hospitals. You can have them here. All these people that are against communism, that are trying to overthrow the government that we've been watching, our secret police have been watching, you can have them. And they basically used it to deport all their problem people. It was kind of hilarious. The Mariella boat lifts. It was a situation where the Carter administration was trying to present itself as being anti-communist. We're going to allow Cubans to leave. We're going to arrange ththese boats to go to Cuba to let Cubans be free. And Fidel said, oh, you want to take them? By all means, go take them. Go take them. And it was was kind of a strategic win for the Cubans. That they took advantage of the imperialists. So there you go. The UN approves sanctions on North Korea. They recently removed Israel from their shame list. Serves the imperialists should have disbanded. Well, here's the thing, okay? I am against all sanctions on North Korea, but I understand why Russia and China vote for them, okay? And this is what you have to understand. These things are complicated, okay? Let me explain. All right. There's this thing called the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And it prevents countries that don't have nuclear weapons from getting them. Before the treaty, the USA was going around to all of its buddies, like South Africa, like various authoritarian regimes, and helping them develop nuclear weapons. So the Soviet Union was scrambling and giving nuclear weapons to all of its friends too. And the USA and the Soviet Union and most major countries agreed that having all kinds of countries develop nuclear weapons, having, that's a bad situation. We don't want that. So they signed this thing called the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty says if you've already got nukes, you can have them. And if you don't have nukes, you can't get them. Now, Israel has not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, little known fact. And the USA gives aid to Israel, and Israel has nuclear weapons, though they deny it. So the USA giving aid to Israel is illegal under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The USA knows Israel has nukes, and it knows they haven't signed the treaty. So the USA giving any aid to Israel is illegal under international law, and the USA just ignores that, little known fact. But the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty exists, and it basically says the United States can't go to all of its allies around the world and say, you want a nuke? Here's a nuke. You have a nuke. You have a nuke. You have a nuke, right? Because then what would Russia and China have to do? They'd have to go to all of their allies and say, all right, you want a nuke? And pretty soon the whole planet would have nuclear weapons, and pretty soon there'd be a coup or something would happen in a country, and somebody'd be fighting somebody, and a nuke would go off here, and a nuke would go off there, and then the world would end. We don't want that, obviously. Russia and China very much want the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to remain intact. Now, North Korea signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but then they pulled out, which you are allowed to do under the treaty. However, at the time they pulled out of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the UN Security Council, because they all agree that the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is important, they all imposed sanctions on North Korea. Russia supports those sanctions. China supports those sanctions. And that makes sense. Okay? You think about it, right? If they create a precedent where any country can just quit the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and get nukes, that could lead to a situation where pretty soon we have nuclear war on our hands. So Russia and China, I don't know. I mean, they don't tell me, but I would assume there are probably many people in Russia and many people in China who understand why North Korea felt a need to get nukes and sympathize with them. But they're in a tough spot. If they don't go along with the United States and put the sanctions on North Korea, then the United States is going to say, oh, you want to play that game? Okay, I guess we'll start giving all of our allies nukes and not sanctioning that. And it opens Pandora's box, so to speak. Right? And you have to understand that, right? This is a global chess game that we're playing here. And right now there's a rule that says if you sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and you don't have nukes and you quit the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and then you get nukes, we sanction you. And Russia and China need that rule to stay in effect. So they're kind of in a situation where their hands are tied. They have to sanction North Korea. And if they don't, then the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty dies and every U.S.-aligned regime in the world gets nuclear weapons. So then they have to give nuclear weapons to all of their friends. And pretty soon the whole planet has nuclear weapons. And then somebody pushes a button or somebody gets scared of somebody. And then we all die in a nuclear war, which is not good. So you have to think about it from that perspective. And people don't think about these things, right? People just want to grandstand, right? Russia and China aren't really anti-imperialist. They sanction North Korea for having nukes. Well, you got to understand the circumstances here. You got to understand the circumstances here. You got to understand what's going on, right? Now, that said, like I said, if it was up to me, if it was up to just Caleb and nobody else, I would say only North Korea. I would say North Korea should be allowed to protect itself with nuclear weapons. But then again, if it was really up to me, North Korea wouldn't need nuclear weapons because the sanctions would be lifted and the U.S. troops would be brought home and they wouldn't need them to begin with. So the whole situation, war is hell. And that includes cold wars and conflict, frozen conflicts, escalations. These things are hell. And in wars, people often make decisions that are not what you would do in the abstract. You know, everyone loves to do this. They sit there and they say, well, if I was in North Korea, I wouldn't get nuclear weapons. Oh, okay. You can feel that way. You can tell yourself that. But you don't know that. You're in a situation in the 90s like North Korea was where millions of your people are starving to death because of the USA and the sanctions they're putting on the country. And there's U.S. nukes in South Korea, and there's USA's practicing all-out destruction of your country on an annual basis, and you're having food shortages, and you think that under those circumstances, you say, well, I would never get nukes. Oh, okay. Well, you can tell yourself that, but you don't know that, right? And you might say, oh, under those circumstances, I would allow total free speech in my country. Okay, you can tell yourself that, but you don't know that that's what you would do, right? And that when you divorce decisions and policies from their context, when you make it about right and wrong, getting nuclear weapons is wrong, authoritarianism is wrong. It's like you take these things out of context and you just declare them. You're not being realistic. You're not. And the conditions that North Korea is in make it pretty understandable why they have nuclear weapons, and make it also pretty understandable why they're an authoritarian country. And that's the way it is. And that's not what North Korea wants, right? Again, people play this game where they're like, well, Caleb, tell me what your ideal world would look like. Well, my ideal world would be a world with so much wealth, so much abundance, that there was no need for any state coercion. There was no poverty. There was no inequality. People could just do what they want, from each according to his own ability to each according to his needs. That's my ideal world. But that's thousands of years in the future. The only way we can get there is by eliminating scarcity, by creating a society where labor becomes life's prime want, no longer a necessity, by reaching that ultimate stage of communism. So when you ask me what my ideal world is, well, is your ideal world North Korea? Of course not. North Korea's ideal world is not North Korea. They don't like having their country divided. They don't like having weapons pointed at them. They don't like facing sanctions, right? The way people talk about politics, the way people talk about regimes and governments and policies, they don't understand them. They talk about this in this very abstract way. That's how they talk. And it's not realistic. It's not realistic. All right, next question. If Jose is going to be there at your speech, it better be a good one, or else he will interrupt. You know, I would consider it an honor to be interrupted by Jose. I would consider that to be an honor, because it would be like, having a painting painted for you by Picasso or by Rembrandt. It would be like having a master opera singer sing an oratory. To be interrupted by Jose. He is a master interrupter. That Jose guy, he knows the art of interrupting. It would be like, there's an old story that I heard. It was a famous boxer. I forget which one, Jack Johnson or one of them. And he was in a restaurant, and some guy walked over and was like being a jerk to him. He's like, hey, buddy, I want to fight. And he just ignored him. And he was being a jerk. And this guy's a famous boxer, Jack Johnson. And he was trying to provoke him into a fight. Jack Johnson ignored him. And after the guy who was being a jerk went away, they said to Jack Johnson, you're a famous boxer. Why didn't you just mess that guy up? And he said, well, if I was an opera singer and someone was harassing me, would I then sing a beautiful song for them? If I was a famous painter and somebody was being a jerk on the street, would I then stop and paint them a picture? Boxing, fighting is my art. And so I only share my art with those who are worthy, And somebody being a jerk to me on the street is not worthy of my art. Well, I think it's similar, that Jose's disruptions are his art. So if Jose were to take his time to disrupt one of my speeches, that would be him giving me a master performance, right? That would be like a boxer going into the ring. So I would take it as a compliment. To get interrupted by Jose. And maybe I should tell him that before the speech. Maybe we should plan for Jose to disrupt me at some point, but maybe not. Maybe it should be a surprise. I don't know. You're going to have to come to the event and see for yourself. Will Jose disrupt my speech or someone else's speech? You'll just have to see. Is Jose capable of going to an event, even if he's a speaker, and not disrupting somebody? We will have to see. That is the mystery of the event. You'll have to see at the event. This could get interesting, folks. I appreciate your sense of humor, John. Caleb, do you get rid of BlackRock? All right. Very, very good. Very, very, very good. Very, very, very good. Very, very, very good. All right. Next question. Your segment on offensive memes reminds me of when I was young and I used to harass people with offensive memes, but now I've changed and I'm the one being attacked. And you also said that during 2018, you wanted to fit in with people who joked about the Holocaust and killing commies, and my buddies now want to kill me. You can change. You can change. And this is a really important thing. This is a really, really, really important thing because I can't stress this enough. I keep coming back to this theme. You can change. You can make mistakes. Human beings make mistakes. To err is human. Okay? And the problem with social media is that it doesn't allow people to do that. No one on social media ever admits they're wrong. You know why? Because the other people on social media will never let them live it down if they do. And that's a really big problem. Cancel culture has created an atmosphere where no one ever can admit they're wrong and no one can ever be forgiven. And it's a big mess. Kanye West, his deranged anti-Semitic rant that he gave, he would not have given that. You know, he said some nasty things about Jews he shouldn't have said that were very offensive. And then he got canceled for it. And in our world, in social media in 2023, you're not allowed to go, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Instead, they dogpile onto you and they call you every nasty name. And the only way you can save face is to go, yeah, I said that. You got a problem with, and look tough. And it is the most vile thing about the toxicity of Twitter in particular. No one on Twitter can ever admit they're wrong. And no one on Twitter will ever allow anyone else to just admit they're wrong. And it's a really big problem. Battle Cossack, I don't know who you are, but you're telling me you did some things. You said some things that were not okay a long time ago, but you realize now that you made a mistake. I forgive you. And we should all forgive you. And you know what? It doesn't just apply to Battle Cossack. It applies to everybody watching right now. If you made a mistake, if you were against the CPI, if you've spread nasty, hateful lies about us, if you heard something that you thought was true and you repeated it, we will forgive you. We will forgive you. Now, if you look like somebody who might be a danger to our organization, we're not going to let you in our space. But most people that make mistakes are not a danger to us. People make mistakes. I was a synthetic leftist for years. I was in the Workers' World Party. There's things I used to say I don't say no more. I was an atheist, and then I returned to God. People make mistakes. People make mistakes. And it's okay. And that you can't have a discourse. You cannot have political discourse if no one's ever allowed to go, you know what? I used to think this, but now I realize that's not right. Because the whole thing that we're doing is education. We're trying to teach people. And you can't teach people if they're not allowed to learn. And learning often means unlearning what you thought you knew before. And if we don't create an atmosphere where people can be wrong, we can't ever expect people to be right. And this is a really, really, really big problem. And I'm glad. I see Funky is in the chat and she's agreeing with me, and Briggy, and it's important. To thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night as the day. Thou cast not then be false to any man. Polonius from Hamlet. You did it. Killian did an amazing rendition of this, because I quoted that, just the first part, to thine own self be true, in my speech. And that inspired Killian to do the monologue from Hamlet. And we'll post that. We're going to edit the talent show, different videos from the talent show we did at our recent retreat. And we're going to post that. But that was kind of to thine own self be true became kind of a theme for our weekend retreat. And somebody else said that phrase is actually used by Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know that. And I used it in my speech in class number 2-4. And for some reason, the big line that came out of our weekend retreat that we just did in Missouri was to thine own self be true. That became the big line from our weekend retreat. So I'll be editing the different speeches. I think I'll do the talent night first. And I have to edit the episode of Jyoti Brar. That's the very next thing. Jyoti and Harpal Brar and myself, we recorded an episode last week before I went to Missouri. And so now I finally have time to edit it. So that's the first thing I'm changing. The first thing I'm editing is my, episode with Jyoti Brar. Then after that, I'm going to start editing stuff from the weekend retreat. The talent show, I think we'll put up first, and then the different classes that were given, some of the discussion. We got a lot of great material from the retreat, right? We do a lot of great stuff. So yeah, it's going to be pretty cool. It's going to be pretty cool. So there you go. All right. What do you think of Che Guevara? I think Che Guevara is a great example of a person who was not motivated by their own economic self-interest, but rather their own great feelings of love for humanity. Che Guevara said that a revolutionary must be motivated by great feelings of love. He was from a wealthy family in Argentina, and he became a communist, and he gave his life to the revolution. He went to a country that he'd never been in, and he fought to bring communism to Cuba. And almost as soon as it was set up, he was trying to figure out how to make it spread. And then he went to the Congo, and he fought for the African people. And then he went to Bolivia, and he ultimately was killed by the CIA. So he was a very heroic individual. That said, I don't think his economic theories are correct. When he was running Cuba's economy as the head of the national bank, and when he was, trying to, in the early years of building socialism in Cuba, he tried to build socialism without material incentives. And he fell into an ultra-leftist trap. He thought that Cuba could become fully communist in poverty. And that didn't work out very well. And Cuba moved away from his policies. They adopted material incentives. They adopted, some of the programs that Stalin had developed in the Soviet Union. Che wanted to kind of build pure communism in impoverished Cuba, and it didn't work. And so then eventually he went around the world, trying to spread communism, gave his life in the battlefield, and that, Che Guevara's economic policies, the Cuban government now pretty universally says, what he advocated in his pamphlet, Socialism and Man in Cuba, that's not correct, right? However, his dedication to the Cuban people as the symbol of the ideal communist, self-sacrificing individual. He's got this beautiful mausoleum in Cuba that Cuban school children pledge every morning that they will live like Che Guevara. He is the symbol of anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism and revolution. He's wildly popular all throughout South and Central America. I think positively of Che Guevara, but I can be critical. And I think that his economic policies were not effective. but he did leave a legacy as a hero of anti-colonial revolution. And he inspired people to fight for their national liberation on many different continents. And revolution is not a dinner party. There were a lot of executions in the aftermath of the Cuban Revolution. There was a lot of executions, and war is a really ugly thing. And he was a war guy. He was in battlefield, and there's a lot of killing, and we can't gloss over that either, right? Let's not pretend he was just Mr. Nice Guy and that he never killed anybody. He certainly killed a lot of people. He was very much a heavy-handed figure, and he was involved in some of the ugly aspects of the Cuban Revolution, but he was fighting against U.S. imperialism. So it's complicated. It's all very, very complicated. Again, all very, very, very complicated. Yes, he was a doctor. That is correct. He did go to medical school. He did become a doctor. That is true. That is true. That is true. That is true. All right, next question. It's another question I answered from the thing about you can change. Caleb, do you want to get rid of BlackRock? Absolutely. BlackRock is imposing degrowth. It is essentially using its leverage as a financer and a lender to degrow the economy. And to force a woke and degrowth agenda on businesses around the world. It is the main entity pushing that the way to solve the capitalist crisis is to reduce consumption. And I think very negatively of BlackRock, and the policies it imposed on Sri Lanka created a food crisis. And its goals, that are often carried out in the name of climate change, are disastrous. They're very bad for the countries and the businesses that they cooperate with. They're pushing degrowth. The problem isn't growth. Growth is good. The problem is capitalism. The problem is the irrational nature of the capitalist system, where poverty persists amid plenty, and poverty is caused by abundance. That's the problem. The problem is not growth. We want growth. Growth is good. Exploitation, the anarchy of production, they are not. But we're not against growth. We are not against growth. So on that note, folks, I'm going to put on the closing music. It's been fun. I believe I'll be back tomorrow night. It's going to be late, but I'll be back tomorrow night. So we'll put on the closing music. Upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.